Welcome again to the first plenary. I am Joyce Lee and thrilled to be moderating this panel today with our distinguished speakers. I am really thrilled to hear about our plenary speakers and the keynote speaker talking about the growth of this program, HIBR, and also seeing all of you scholars here today. I am Joyce Lee and the president of Indigo JLD Green Health Practice. Many of you knew me as the chief architect of New York City OMB. And yes, in New York City, our city team created the LEED pilot credit for design for active occupants, serving buildings like schools, affordable housing, and cultural institutions that serve 100%. And thank you again for the reminder. More recently, my firm's work in Colorado, working with the Urban Land Institute, help communities understand, these are communities near the Denver airport, the impact of truck traffic, rail traffic, air quality, crosswalk, and injuries. And last year, Liz and I put together a team to advance the design guidance for wellness and lactation rooms, infrastructure, and accommodations that became the best practice at the American Institute of Architects. So today, thanks to Mamava and a QR code pointing to the best practice document, we have made available for all of you to take back to your human resource department the wellness room door hanger, a very practical take home. It says Mom inside with the international symbol, and our goal is to create the best wellness room that all mothers deserve. So back to our panel here. We are going to be focusing on implementation and leadership. And I've asked each of the panelists to talk about their proudest achievement in the green health space. First, we have Heather Henriksen, who is the managing director of Harvard University Office of Sustainability. She has done many great things, and most recently in Cambridge, we talk about the Harvard Museums, which is probably one of the first buildings that employed exclusively LED lights in art museum gallery lighting. And of course, she has done many other things, and I'm going to turn over the mic to her to talk about recent projects at her office.
Great, thank you. I'm just going to stand. Funny sitting. So first, I'm going to say, just a quick question. So how many people in the room are building owners or work with owners, like an architect or a designer? And then how many, so that's most people, it looks like, and then how many researchers, scientists are heroes? Great. So I think, Harvard University, obviously, first and foremost, what we have to contribute, along with researchers in this room and elsewhere globally, is the research and the science. How do we help ground the work in the built environment around health in the science? And tomorrow you're going to hear from Dr. Joe Allen, who we work with closely, about our sort of holistic approach to health in the built environment. And I'm going to actually drill down on one of the areas of health in the built environment that we are working on related to chemicals of concern and materials. The second way that I think everyone would have guessed that's what Harvard would do, is ground things in the science and use our researchers and students. But the second thing you may not think of is we're a huge owner. So Harvard is actually the size of Google. We're double the size of Yale for comparison. And 27 million square feet of real estate, similar CapEx budget to Google, and we buy a lot of stuff. So this is where the nexus of these things comes together, because at the end of the day, what we're trying to do is translate the research into practice to actually create healthier materials for all, not just the 1%. I completely agree with that comment, and to scale this research. So let me tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So I think probably this room is disproportionately educated and knows the fact that in the United States, at least from a federal perspective, we don't have the regulations that look at chemicals as classes. They're individual, about 83,000 or so chemicals in the environment or in the industrial use. Only 9 of them on our count, that little red dot, are actually regulated at a federal level. So I think that was a wake-up call, certainly for me 6 years ago. I've been in this position for 10, and we really started to work hard on how do we address this problem as purchasers and researchers to do something about it, because that seems really unacceptable to us. And we also see this as risk. This is risk. These chemicals of concern like PFAS are the future PCBs, our researchers say, and we're going to have to remediate them or replace these things. So, huge problem. The other, of course, is that our researchers are producing the science, and I think one of the key points that resonated, at least on our community, and I think is resonating in others in the private sector, is we certainly couldn't ignore the science of our own scientists in the higher education institution. But I think that the Googles and the Facebooks and the Kaiser Permanentes and others are really also seeing that they can't ignore this science, and this is about the health and productivity of their folks. And our scientists also have a lot of different solutions that we think we can add to. So what are we doing about this sort of big challenge? One is this is basically what we're doing today when we buy millions and millions of dollars, billions if you add it up, in building materials. We find this totally unacceptable. Would you feed this to your kids if you saw this, or yourself, or your dog? I wouldn't even feed this to my dog. I'm worried about the packaging of his food. This is what we're buying, and this is what has to change. So what are we doing to change it in the marketplace? So this is our sort of playbook or our approach. We're really trying to help people, the standards that have been out there, cradle to cradle, declare health product declarations. We're trying to, and companies asking for what's in my products. We're really trying to drive transparency, what is in this stuff, because you can't get it out or work with manufacturers until you know. And then ground our decisions truly in the science and third-party verified standards that optimize for health. So the end goal is really fix the problem upstream, don't create the PFAS to begin with. But the only way that we think that we do that rapidly and effectively and inclusively is to actually make a market transformation, send the market signal that we will no longer buy products with PFAS in them. And not just Harvard, but Harvard working with other partners, and I'll talk about that later, to do it together. So this is how we started. We basically mapped, this is a bit of an eye chart, so you don't have to read the whole thing, but we mapped our ecosystem of who are all the people at Harvard University that touch the built environment. And I suspect it's similar for any large owner. We certainly have researchers and students, but you have people that are in your spaces. You have facilities managers, campus planners, strategic procurement, and then we work with contractors, architect, designers. So anyway, we started with this, and about 4 years ago, really hard working on educating our community about chemicals of concern and trying to get aligned on a vision to try to get things out quickly. We focused on interior spaces, and I'll tell you a little bit about what we've been able to do really in the last 2 years, because we launched Living Lab in higher ed. Basically means translating the research into practice to pilot it, prove it, scale it, and help others in society globally do this work. So one of our big examples of Living Lab is we launched the Harvard Building Materials Academy. And this is a partnership which is unique in higher ed, I think. It's a formal partnership between our office and researchers at the Center for Climate, Health, and the Global Environment, Change. It's the group that Gina McCarthy, former EPA head, just took over at the Harvard Chan School of Public Health. So we have a formal partnership with this group of faculty that are from public health, medical school, and engineering predominantly. And we're literally trying to say, how do we do this? How do we translate your research into practice using a large 27 million square feet place that does a lot of capital projects and building operation and optimize for health? And in less than a year, because of our network and partnerships with Google, Kaiser Permanente, and others, and sort of standing on their shoulders and getting smarter, we were able to go from transparency, which we've demanded in our capital projects since 2014, with the lead material disclosures requirements on all of our capital projects. That wasn't very popular in 2014 with the architects or designers. We literally have gone and been able to go from transparency to optimization for health in at least requirements in 4 product categories already: furniture, carpet, window treatments, and wall base, and will continue. So the summary is, how are we institutionalizing this change? And what do we think that we can ultimately do? So again, we've done this already now in about almost now 30 major capital projects. These are major renovations or new buildings for the most part, but we've also done some small ones on the side. And we've really engaged hundreds of people, not just the architects and designers. I've probably talked to, over 100 manufacturers personally, and with our team, many, many more. And we probably have a database now of about 10,000 products of research that we've done in the last couple of years. As I said, we've moved to align the manufacturers and the entire ecosystem grounded in the science. So we certainly do use different tools, but we're trying to get these classes of chemicals out of these products. And the top 3 that we've really focused on are the favorites: chemical flame retardants, antimicrobials, and the PFAS, or the fluorinated chemicals. Because usually those are added in, so everyone today can say, I don't want those added into my product. And your chair or your carpet will look exactly the same. So why not do that? Last thing I just want to point out is we're trying to scale this again for market transformation. We're going to try to do it first with Google and then take it out further. We completely agree that the end game is to make this everybody. This is the standard. You cannot, you can't have the 1% having this and not the 100%. I completely agree with the previous speaker. So we have this new partnership we launched in May that really elevates us. We're trying to basically share playbooks, replicate them, and then get others to join us. And I'm happy to take questions on that. In summary, I think owners or people that work with owners, these are 7 things that we've done, and I think you can do today. Start educating everyone you work with about the science. There's some good nonprofit science groups out there like Green Science Policy that has 6 classes. Our researchers certainly have on our website a class-based sort of cheat sheets to help you. Map your procurement ecosystem. That's your leverage, is your buying power. We also use standards. We have focused, as I said, on doing more with carpet and furniture and these other categories. But we use Declare. We use Cradle to Cradle. We definitely use HPDs. Those are our ingredient list and our preferred ones. And then we piloted it, proved it, and we're continuing to pilot on all of our projects, like 12 to 15 things in the interiors beyond red list free things and whatnot. We've partnered with folks. We have to work with manufacturers who, by the way, aren't aligned with this. They don't want to poison their workers or their customers. And then formalize your commitments, I think, in standards. When we require things, we get them. When we suggest them, we do not, at least in our capital projects. And then build a network, because that's how they go farther, faster. And this is a quote from Dr. Allen, who you'll hear from tomorrow. So I think what this shows to me is researchers are really excited to work with practitioners because they see that their research is not going in journals, as Gina McCarthy would say, to die, but is being translated into solving the problem. The other thing Dr. Allen will talk about, and we have tons of research on our website too, tomorrow is, again, materials is one aspect. We're also working on into air quality, lighting, biophilic design, and other things. So with that, I will end.
Thank you very much. Being a believer of evidence-based design, this is a great presentation. Next, we have Richard Piacentini, who is the Executive Director and CEO of the Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. And many of you already know about the philanthropies of Heinz and Carnegie in Pittsburgh. Phipps actually has been for a very long time, been leading a lot of the practice in Pittsburgh, meeting very high certification standard, but on top of that, actively communicating to the community. So thank you, Richard.
Thank you, Joyce, and thank you for inviting me to be here today. As you can see from this slide, where Phipps Conservatory and Botanical Gardens is located in Pittsburgh, not too far from here in southwest Pennsylvania. Our institution is 125 years old. For the first 100 years, it was run by the city of Pittsburgh, and then for the last 25 years, it's been run by a private nonprofit organization. And since we've been private, we've really been focused on this idea of connecting human and ecological health, and really trying to emphasize that in everything that we do. And Joyce had asked if there's any kind of aha moment in our building projects that I'd like to share with you. And I do recall back in 2007, when we were first getting involved in our first Living Building Challenge project, I was talking to this visiting professor from Germany, and I was telling him about the red list. Now, the Living Building Challenge has this red list of 22 different classes of chemical compounds that you're not allowed to have in any of your building products. And I was telling him about this, and he looked at me and he laughed, and he just says, "Oh, you Americans really amaze me." I said, "Why? What do you mean?" He goes, "What's the first thing you do when you find out you're going to have a baby? You paint the room, you get new carpet, you buy new furniture, and when the baby arrives, you put him in there, you lock the door with a baby monitor, and you watch him from a safe distance while all these chemicals are off-gassing from all these new products." And that was an aha moment for me. Let me ask you, how many of you have done that or have known somebody who's done that? I mean, when you think about it, we're really clueless when it comes to some of these things, and we just assume just because you can buy it, it's got to be okay. And that's clearly not the case. Well, we went on to build that building, the Center for Sustainable Landscapes. It's our education, research, and administration building. It opened in December of 2012, and it did get fully Living Building Challenge certified. It also was LEED Platinum certified. It was the first building to get WELL Platinum certified. It was the first building to get 4-star Sustainable Site certified, which is like LEED for landscapes. And it was also Net Zero Energy certified. And it's the first building, that's still the only building in the world that's gotten all of these certifications simultaneously in one building. Now, I'd like to go back and just talk a little bit more about the Living Building Challenge, because it's really interesting to me. When we started the Living Building Challenge, the Living Building Challenge requires that your building has to be net zero energy, has to make more energy than it uses, has to be net zero water. You have to capture and treat all your sanitary and stormwater on site. And then it has this red list of toxic materials. When we started our project, we assumed the net zero energy and the net zero water was going to be the hardest thing to do. Well, it turned out the hardest thing to do was to adhere to the red list. We found when we went out and started to talk to manufacturers that either they didn't know what was in their product or they didn't want to tell us. Good example. When we started the design on this project, there was only one rug in the United States that was red list free. Now, fortunately for us, it came in a couple of different colors, so we at least had a little bit of a choice. The other thing was, when we started our project, we wanted to have nice new wooden doors in the building. We could not find a single door manufactured in the U.S. that didn't have some formaldehyde in it. Fortunately now, we're on our 4th Living Building Challenge project, and I can tell you that it's getting a lot easier now to find materials. Manufacturers are starting to step up to the plate, but as Heather mentioned, there's still a long way to go in really making this to be transparent and really make it easy for people to find things that are healthy. A couple of other things I want to tell you about. In 2015, we opened our Nature Lab. It's a modular classroom. The impetus for this was to start a conversation in our community about the types of places we're putting kids. Kids are the most vulnerable members of society. We tend to put them in some of the worst buildings. A good example is when most school districts need a new classroom, they typically buy a portable. Really bad. They off-gas lots of chemicals. They have very little natural daylight, very little natural ventilation. Really, the kind of place, the last place you should put a kid in is a modular building. So we wanted to build a modular building that would meet the Living Building Challenge. There's a demonstration to talk about what kind of places we're putting kids in. As you can see on the right, I think it's the right, We are in the middle of construction right now of our exhibit staging center, which is a much, when you're fundraising, that sounds better than maintenance building. But that building is actually an old public works building. And what we wanted to show people that if you want to build a super green, high-performance green building, you don't have to tear down these ugly old cinder block buildings. You can turn them into some of the greenest buildings in the world. So we're going for Living Building Challenge certification on that as well. Now, because in addition to kids, who else gets the crummiest buildings? Maintenance people. So we're actually going for a WELL Platinum certification on this building as well to show people that we can build healthy places for everyone that are good for people and good for the planet. We've also started a research program that's really focused on looking at the connection between human and ecological health, and we're really focused on where this connection happens between the built environment and the natural environment, and we're really excited about this program. We've also embraced the One Health movement, which is linking human, animal, and environmental health, and we're really emphasizing the environmental health. We had our second symposium last March that was focused on chemicals of concern in the environment. And to quote one of our speakers at that meeting, that this idea of endocrine disruptors and chemicals in the environment is the potential to be just as bad as the whole climate change problem. So this is something we really need to start focusing on. We have a lot of information from that conference on our website if you're interested. The last thing I wanted to say, I know Joyce asked if we were going to have a chance to talk about food. Talk about food at the conference, and I hope we do get to that over the course of the next 2 days. Back in 2011, we got involved in former First Lady Michelle Obama's Let's Move program, which was focused on children's health. And we really started to develop a lot of programs related to children's health, and we realized that we get about 500,000 visitors to FIPS each year, and a lot of those visitors are children. And it didn't make a lot of sense for us to talk about children's health and then serve junk in our cafe. So in 2011, we stopped selling soda, we stopped selling junk food, we stopped selling fried food, and we really tried to focus on this idea of providing healthy foods for people. And it's really been very successful for us. In fact, I guess about 3 years ago, Food and Wine magazine featured us as one of the top 20 museum restaurants in the country. And we got really excited about that, which just goes to show that who says you can't have your cake and eat it too? Except we don't serve cake. So with that, I'll turn it over to our next speaker, I think is Franco.
Thank you very much, Richard. And thank you for being a pioneer in the sustainability and wellness movement and for talking about nourishment and healthy food. Because as a living building, as a LEED Platinum, WELL Platinum building, you're still serving those who are, let's say, on free lunches because you have a lot of children visiting your building. So I think keep up the great work. Thanks. And our third speaker, last but not least, is Fernando Arias, who is the Director of Sustainability at Clark Construction. Many of you might have met him already. We are thrilled of his wonderful work at the conference and all that you're doing in the contracting construction community sector.
Thank you for that, Joyce. So I thought I would start out with an opportunity to share a little bit about how I got involved in the topic of health in buildings and then relay that a little bit to our current work at Clark. So for me, as a former military technician that became an architect, I was always interested in the operations and in the scale of the built environment and fixing problems and making things work. And I became attracted to the topic of health in buildings when I looked at the various experiences in my family and their history with cancer, as well as with personal injuries. And I started to understand that the occupational hazards and the kinds of things that we're exposed to every day and the buildings that we live, work, and play in can have a tremendous impact on our health. So I had the fantastic opportunity to do some of that work at the Clinton Global Initiative, which is initially how I ended up meeting Mr. Charles Bloomberg, who's in the audience with us today. And he and I had a terrific opportunity to gather a lot of important minds to this topic and to be able to congregate around how do we translate the research into practice. And so at Clark, I would say everything starts with our people. And to be able to parlay the experience of research into practice, we rely on our amazing employees, 4,000 of them nationwide in 7 regional markets. And it's a tremendous pleasure and pride to be working at the nation's #2 green builder. I don't know if you all knew that, but it's really a tremendous opportunity to impact hundreds of communities across the country in 7 regional markets. So with about 420 sustainably certified buildings, most of them LEED, but many other innovative certifications as well, that's almost $33 billion worth of construction that's been devoted to just sustainable buildings. And there's a tremendous amount that we can continue to do as we introduce our clients, our design teams to the technologies that enable healthy buildings to actually operate and to work. So I want to give you an opportunity to see some of the things that I'm really proud about that we have had the opportunity to build and to touch communities. And so whether it's working on transformational economic development engines, which is how I like to think of it, here with DC's new waterfront project called The Wharf, or building one of Chicago's most healthy, smart, and green commercial high-rise buildings, or even creating medical campuses in New Haven that earn reputations for being highly ecologically sustainable and responsible to the communities, from sustainability all the way to medical practice, supporting quality care. And then the vast range of capacity to deliver inspiring and highly performative buildings inside and outside. I mean, it's just the scale of impact that we can affect by being great stewards of our people and our construction operations, to be able to build innovative buildings and campuses like this and like many of the others that I shared. This is our technical capacity that we bring to the table. And so the idea here that we would like to leave you thinking about is that design, as it translates into buildings, is some of the ways in which we try to contribute to the triple bottom line, and we try to ensure that as we gather all the stakeholders to the table and we apply and we integrate the research community's findings and recommendations into the way in which even subcontractors operate and install equipment in buildings like this, I don't want you to forget that really what we're also talking about all day, every day in this conference for the next 2 days is about how multiple factions in the built environment impact people, their quality of life, both on the job and in their everyday lives. And so I'm very proud to work at a company that takes our people's safety and our people's quality of life very seriously.
Thank you very much, Fernando. That was terrific. So I think what I'm going to do is to start asking each speaker perhaps a question, and then we're going to engage in a conversation, and then we're going to open up to all of you for some Q&A. So Heather, as a leader, you talk about creating processes. In addition to that, at Harvard, we know that it has many schools, multi-directional, huge population. How do you set directions for the outcomes that you want to see? And my follow-up question is, working with Google, you're really doing a lot of this work, starting creating databases from scratch. Mm-hmm. And with all of the ongoing discussion, controversy on data, privacy, how do you see all of that going?
It's a very academic question because it's 2 questions in one. I did the same thing. So on the first, I think what you're getting at is, I mean, at the end of the day, what my team does, and I think sustainability folks, certainly in organizations do, is organizational change. And so, you know, I think, again, grounded in the science, we really started with our faculty and other science from other scientists to say, how do you start to break down the huge challenge of the 80,000, and how do you set a strategy to start making progress and not let perfect be the enemy of the good and wait for the standards to be perfect? And that was really, again, a collective vision. The way we went about it, again, is to go out and do focus groups with people like Fernando in construction, subcontractors, as well as designers and project managers and facilities people. So we really mapped, as I said, the ecosystem. And then we worked with our, we like to balance. So what about all the practitioners? And I'd throw in manufacturers with that, and then the scientists. And then we say, okay, how do we do the greatest good and get this moving as quickly as possible to make the most impact? And how do we reduce the touch? It's super high touch right now. In order to just to do your interior space. It's super high touch to go out and find something. So one on carpet, just as or on furniture rather, as an example, we took a standard that is certainly known in healthcare, but the Healthy Interior Standard, which basically says, again, not individual chemicals, but classes. No PFAS, no antimicrobials, no highly fluorinated chemicals, no fly ash, no PVC. And we said, great, that's our standard for furniture. Now, going and getting that, even from the best of the best, like Herman Miller and Knoll, Steelcase, those folks, it wasn't that they didn't have it, it's that it's impossible to find. So part of this process that we put together is to try to prove that at scale, with 12 CEOs, 12 CFOs, 12 heads of facilities, you get the message, and hundreds of capital projects a year, that we could do this easily. And yes, we do have a person on my team who's a genius researcher from Johns Hopkins who is, helping support these project teams in their infancy to say, okay, you don't like the Shaw or the Pat Craft carpet that's off the shelf that meets our standard without these chemicals. We'll talk to X manufacturer and see if we can't get them to meet our standard. And that's really what we've been doing, setting up that process, but we've been very most focused on what's the biggest impact? Interiors. What's the biggest impact on the chemical front? Some of these big classes, again, that we feel like you can just take out right away. Like I mentioned, the PFAS, the antimicrobials, the chemical flame retardants. So that has been sort of our process to narrow and try to have the highest impact. And I'll be honest, on transparency, sometimes we take a letter from a CEO, because there isn't an HPD or a declare label or something. But we've told them, you're on watch. If you don't get us an HPD and full ingredient list at 100 parts per million, we're not going to buy you in the future. And we're going to tell all our friends not to buy you. So I think that's sort of the process that we've set up. And then that links to Google in the sense that, we've been working with Google for a couple of years. We were one of the early access partners on Portico, which is a database that Healthy Building Network created with Google that really is trying to get at how do you take these ingredient lists and how do I make a decision? I am not a chemist. I'm not an industrial hygienist. I don't have a PhD. And I think that one of the challenges of it is just the data quality. So who puts that ingredient list together really matters, and how much knowledge they have. And then there isn't currently great third-party verification of, have you told us everything? Is that exactly what's in? These supply chains, as you mentioned, are really complicated, and it's not that the manufacturers are being obstructionist, it's just super complicated. So I think what we want to do with Google is, and we already have in the last, again, as I described, we went from transparency to requirements for carpet, furniture, wall base, and window treatments, which are pretty big interior categories, beyond any of the standards out there, cradle to cradle, declare, anybody, in less than a year. And that's because we leveraged the knowledge of Google, who've been working on this for a while. So we didn't start here, we started here. And what we hope to do with Google is share our playbooks and figure out how you do this, and then help everybody else do this faster so everybody else starts here, not here.
That was great. And Richard, being a pioneer, you must have instances when stakeholders do not align. And when they do not, how do you provide support, boundaries, and give them space to deliver? Maybe talk a little bit about the interaction with your team, and in particular, the Board of Trustees.
That's a good question.
In your institution.
Well, I think first thing is if you don't set high goals, you're probably not going to reach them. So the first thing is to really make sure that you have high but achievable goals. And then for us, part of what it was setting a track record. I only shared a couple of the projects with you, but we go back to the early 2000s. We built the first LEED certified visitor center in a public garden. We followed that up with the first greenhouses ever to get LEED certified. We got platinum, which is the highest rating they give under the existing buildings program. We then went and built a tropical forest conservatory that is probably the most energy efficient conservatory in the world. It's 100% passively cooled, has no greenhouse effect. And along the way, we made sure that we did a lot of marketing. We also did a lot of applied for different awards to really get the word out of some of the things that we were doing. And what our board saw over time was we were setting goals, we were achieving them, we were getting national and international attention. So far, we've won over 70 different national and international awards for our projects. That got them very excited. So when we told them that we wanted to do a Living Building Challenge project, even though at that point no one had ever done one before, they were like, okay, go for it. But I think so that track record was really important and getting the publicity and showing them that people were really excited about what we were doing. The other thing is working with the team. I think it's really important that you support your team in helping you achieve these goals. And again, you have to set high goals, but you have to make sure that you support the staff that are doing this. I remember one time when we were going for our site certification on the Center for Sustainable Landscapes, we wanted to go for 4 stars, which was the highest level you could achieve. And I remember the staff member who was heading up that project for us came into my office one day and said, "Richard, I have bad news. The most we're going to be able to get is 3 stars." And I said, "No. Don't come in here and tell me that we can't do. What I want you to do is go back out, think about the project, figure out what it is we need to do to make it happen. Tell me what do we need additional resources? What do I need to help you to do so that you can make it so that's possible to do that?" She came back a week later and she said, "Here's what we need to do to hit 4 stars." And I said, "Okay, let's do it." And we did it. So I think it's really important, again, to make sure that your staff recognize that you're serious, that you're doing this, and then you support them in what you do.
So we hear that being a leader also means not taking no for an answer.
Sometimes.
So, Fernando, in your sector, when you really influence a lot of buildings, and in the face of cost challenges and clients' questions, how do you build teams to go towards that one goal? Particularly, you have different offices in different cities. There must be different cultures. Do you want to talk about that?
So thanks for the question, Joyce. I know that we've explored as a group, and we all gathered earlier yesterday to get to know each other better. We talked a lot about how our organizations support us and where there are challenges in terms of stakeholders. And so for us, I mentioned those 7 regional markets. And so whether it's the Mid-Atlantic, which is Maryland, D.C., Virginia, or the Chicago area that also cascades down into Nashville, Tennessee, Seattle, Washington, King County area, San Francisco Bay Area, Irvine. See, all of these different regional groups are not only living in different climate conditions, which put them in a various mindset around the impacts that sustainability may have on their lives directly, and then the awareness that their local governments are providing them by way of different programs or different incentives that they're exposed to. So there's a really cool initiative that we're working on that we can't yet announce, but I wish that we could. But it does surround addressing health in the workplace, and by way of which they can not only experience healthier work environments and amenities in the corporate offices, but also really significantly, and particularly to construction, is the on-site conditions on the job. So trailer environments and work construction environments. So in an effort to try to harmonize across the different regions and elevate the level of understanding and of participation in sustainability, I think I've tried to, in my tenure as Director of Sustainability, tried to be the champion and be the visionary that translates for the different regions priorities that they can then adopt. From the very top, our regional executives, all the way down to our youngest members in the organization, because the youngest members are the ones that get it right away, are most excited right away, and are ready to execute yesterday. But the higher the leadership ascends, and the more we try to carry the message up, then we have to do a lot of conversion. So we talked yesterday a little bit about what is the business case for healthy green buildings. And as you queued up the question, you said, clients and costs. So depending again on the market, the incentives vary. But one of the most exciting developments that's happening here in Washington, D.C., is a new omnibus bill called the Clean Energy Act. And it's currently in committee in D.C. Council, and it's going to be heard in full council in September. And so this bill has 4 provisions. One of them is extremely interesting, related to this opportunity to create healthier buildings. So in generating a building performance standard that is tagged to the portfolio manager, EPA's Energy Star portfolio manager, now we have not only requirements for buildings that are 50,000 square feet and larger and stepping down to even 10,000 square feet and larger. We have the opportunity to not only make buildings extra efficient through retrofits, but now we then have to address what's that one translatable KPI across these retrofits that will begin to address health. Because many of us know that the more efficient, the more well-insulated the envelopes of buildings are, the more likely to propagate environments that are virulent with variety of allergens, molds, and the propagation of other human viruses, colds, flus, etc. So to be able to address ventilation or lighting in a way that is proponent of health, it's going to be a great opportunity for the District of Columbia to demonstrate leadership around that. And my suspicion from a professional point of view is that the same as we had the compact fluorescent be that one universal translator of energy efficiency across homes, I think we'll want to think about which kinds of air filtration systems are going to be optimum, because there's different kinds of air conditioning units and ventilation units. Commercial buildings have some that don't ever get seen by most occupants. And so as we come to maybe connect the dots between energy efficiency and this building performance standard, I think that this is another way that, like I was saying, across the country at Clark, we try to address how health in buildings and sustainability is linked, and we are all participants in it. I think that at the city scale and ultimately at the county or state level, to be able to connect the dots between programs that incentivize energy efficiency and also address human health inside of buildings and homes, commercial buildings and homes, I think that that's where we're really excited for.
Terrific. I hope that within this short time, you have an opportunity to peer into the window of the academic sector, institutional sector, and construction sector to see all of these advances of translational work taking place. 2 years ago here in Natcher, I presented Stair Week, which was a governor-supported program in the Midwest promoting the making of active vertical circulation, and that's evidence-based design. And as mentioned, the wellness room work is also based on the peer-reviewed research that has been done by the medical and the health community. So my question to each of you is, what would be some of the research that should have happened yesterday because you're so fast adopting these front-end practices and translation? And what would you like to see more? And in turn, how could industry actually help inform researchers?
Do you want to go first?
Well, sure. I think clearly getting better information on what's in building products is the biggest hurdle. That's the part that we saw was the hardest to try to achieve, and it's still really hard. I mean, hard for us that are really working closely at leading people in this industry, in the area, to really try to find healthy products. But I just think about typical consumer. What do you do when you go to the Home Depot or Lowe's or something like that? How do you find something that's healthy? It's really, really hard to find things that you know is not going to be harmful to you or to your family. So anything that can do to speed that up, I think, is going to be really critical.
And my sense is that the research is there. I think it's packaging that research in a way that at more average people who have to make decisions can use it. And I think that's one of the things that we're hoping to do with the Sea Change folks at Harvard, is really to just say, here's the definitive science that your CEO, your manufacturing company CEO needs for you to act today and make it clear. But I agree with Richard. I mean, as I started my sort of our approach, we need to all be demanding that transparency, because we need to know what's in things. And then that needs to be coupled with very clear, tangible science. And then we can all act in a linear, uniform, or not linear, but definitely uniform fashion. Because if we don't all send the exact same market signal, it's also impossible for these poor manufacturers to try to do it slightly differently for Harvard than Google and other people. The other thing I do want to also just add is that our current requirements, part of the reason that I could get those done across this decentralized organization is we did not pay more for any of the carpet, furniture, and those other categories. And we feel that they're just as resilient and durable. So I think the other piece to this is the backup from the science of, yes, you can have a product that's just as resilient and durable without these things in it. So I think a little bit around the edges, that science could be helpful to us at a practical level.
And I, agree entirely with many of the comments from Heather and Richard, and particularly around the note that the research is already widely available. What's missing is the translational part. And so I'll respond in two ways. I think, firstly, Charles had the great vision, in 2011 and 2012 to create a convening platform to do precisely that, to be able to take some of the most advanced and up-and-coming research around buildings, health, sustainability, and to determine how that would be applicable to policy for facilities, maintenance, and design, as well as how it would go on to inform practicum for architects, interior designers, and other professionals in the industry. So I think that the Health in Buildings Roundtable in this new re-engaged manner will be able to do just that. But we, of course, need other platforms to continue to make the translational research applicable and practical. And I think one thing that is missing, and it's something that during my tenure we're working on quite seriously and plan to do a lot with it during this year's Green Build Conference in Chicago. But we really want to be able to convene the discussion around the market understanding, the market analysis of how healthy and green buildings are a smart investment for developers, And to your point, Heather, it doesn't have to cost any more than a quotidian regular building or an average everyday building. But I think that the different types of clients that we interact with will have a variety of different goals. And so our work, and my particular position on this, is that, I have to be the Rosetta Stone, the translator of a variety of ways of articulating the value proposition of healthy buildings so that it becomes both a risk management opportunity for clients, but at the same time it becomes a capitalization opportunity by addressing market drivers and signals that they resonate with as an investment. So I think that part is still missing, and we want to be an active player in advancing that conversation and demonstrating our understanding of that scope of work.
Joyce, can I just add that I think part of what really just needs to change, and we're trying to do this, is the ROI. So the ROI currently, is basically very resource reduction based. And I think what we want to do is change, and this is a piece of research that is starting to come out, for instance, in our own School of Public Health. But we're trying to do that translational work to say, if you have a green building or if you have better indoor air quality, you can measure that in dollar terms in health and productivity. Because those are the things that, again, CEOs pay attention to. And we as practitioners, I think, that's what we need. We need that arsenal of research to say, okay, in the cases where it might be a little bit more expensive, actually the ROI is just completely wrong because you're not factoring in the health of the occupants. You're only looking at this in one silo. So it's trying to look at this in a holistic way, and I think have data that proves that this is not, that you need to look at it from a long-term perspective and factor in health.
So cost and return on investment. From your leadership perch, any particular barrier in your sector?
Yeah, I see three different barriers when I talk to my colleagues in the institutional world. The first is that I think we tend to focus on symptoms, whether it be loss of habitats or biodiversity or cancer or diabetes. We always try to focus on how do we fix that issue, when we really need to step back and understand that the problem is the way we live, and it's the way we interact with the world. And it's interesting to me, in her work, Carol Sanford talks about 4 different ways that people interact with the world. In the first model, it's called the extractive model. And in this model, a person thinks of the world as fragments, and it's all about themselves. And so a person acting from an extractive point of view tries to get everything they can for themselves. They don't care who they hurt or what they hurt in the process. As long as they get theirs, they don't care. And you probably know some people like this or know some prominent people in the world today who act like this. The second model is called the less bad model. And in this model, a person still thinks about themselves, and they still see the world as fragments, but now they're trying to stabilize them. And here you could see this is where the environmental movement started, where it tried to do less bad, and we tried to, the whole reduce, reuse, recycle came out of this. The third model is called the do-good model. Here the person still sees the world as fragments. It's all about them, but they're starting to see reciprocity, and they're trying to make things a little bit better. And this is where a lot of the green building movement started. The fourth model is called the regenerative model. And the regenerative model, it's not about me, it's about us. The world's not fragments, the world is a whole. And you see yourself as connected to all of these other wholes, and it's all these nested systems within larger and smaller systems, that everything's connected, and anything you do in any one place is going to affect everything else. So when you think from a regenerative point of view, there's no question that when you're looking at a building, you would build a building that's good for people and good for the planet. There's no other way to think about it. The third problem I see, the third barrier, is related to cost. And with cost, I think a lot of us are trained to be like hedge fund managers, that we have to get the biggest bang for the buck today, and we need our payback in 3 to 5 years. Well, a lot of us work for institutions. We should be taking a long-term institutional point of view when we do our things. My institution's 125 years old. We want to be around for another 125 years. I'm sure a lot of you work for institutions that also, whether it be government, higher ed, or other nonprofits, you expect your institution to be here in the long run. We should be building buildings that are good for people and good for the planet over the long term. And if you do the math, any of the buildings that we're talking about up here today, if you look 30, 50, 100 years out, they're way cheaper than any typical standard building. So it just makes financial sense to do it too.
Absolutely. Very profound. Thank you, Richard. I think this is time to open up to the audience, maybe for some questions for our speakers.
Hi. Hi, all right. Hi, everyone. Whitney Austin Gray from Delos. It's such an honor to be here. And I love everyone in this panel. We've worked with you. We've contributed to some of your work. We know about it. We're pushing your innovations out there. And so I have to take the opportunity to provoke and challenge you on a topic I'm interested in around building user empowerment and consumer-driven data. So we're having conversations today, and Dr. Aikam talked about sort of the top-down approaches to health and buildings. And I'd like to also talk about the bottom-up and sort of more empowerment and transparency about the people in your spaces and new tools and strategies that consumers have to demand more in their buildings. So that means they need to be more aware, but they also means we're using technology in new ways. We have examples working with the WELL Building Standard in China where we see people actually monitoring their own air quality and then going online to tell everyone about their employer and what their air quality is. We see them bringing their families into work when we know their air quality is beneficial in the buildings that are breathing for them. We have clients in New York where someone went to Home Depot and got a $15 water test and then found out the water was not at the level it needed to be, told everyone in the company, and for my sustainability friends, you might cringe to find out that they now provide bottled water for all of those folks because they raise so much fear. I'm also excited that that group is now pursuing WELL. But this idea that the building empowered user that says, I want more, I demand more, I have data, I have technology, and I have access to ask for more, I think is a really exciting time for us. And I'd just love to hear from the esteemed panelists around what your thoughts are, maybe what some of the opportunities that you see to engage consumers to drive more demand for healthier buildings.
Well, maybe I'll take a start at the consumer definition because I maybe will address it from the marketplace first. So one of the thoughts that I had around Joyce's question about a barrier is having our subcontractors and our design communities kind of understand what are the right products to specify, what kind of materials comply with requirements. And in the past, it's been challenging to collate all of that information into a centralized, reliable platform. And so one of the ways I think which we are helping to overcome that barrier is to rely on platforms like UL Spot, platforms like the Portico and the Healthy Building Network research database for healthy materials. But I think that it really comes down to the specificity of things and how those materials then get purchased, installed, and ultimately compliant with the requirements. And so I think it's been difficult to figure out what are the trade-offs and what are the premiums around certain materials. And so I think that there's still a lot of work to do around that. And I just wanted to address that from, it's not only just the occupant consumer that's making a retail purchasing decision, but also at the institutional procurement level, that's challenging as well. And sometimes it's been, I don't know how to read the label, if you will, the nutrition label for a product. And when I say product, I also mean gigaton huge ventilation systems, which are in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so those purchasing decisions are even more stringent than, say, will I purchase a baby crib that doesn't have some kind of a varnish or veneer that my child will lick on and possibly be exposed to hazardous chemicals. So,
I would just say that anything you can do to leverage people's interest in these areas is great. I think, so I'm very big proponent of trying to engage people, and I think that, you know, one of the things when we go out and we do a more detailed science talk about these chemicals of concern and the difference between VOCs and SVOCs is that people, their immediate reaction is, what about my home? What about my Patagonia jacket? What about my waterproof mascara? So I think that's great to leverage, and because I do think that health is the future of green buildings, because we are trying to build, you know, what you described as the sustainable development model of healthy, thriving communities. And I think people are uniquely drawn to health. So anything we can do to connect them. I think the only downside is, you know, again, we're trying to get alignment grounded in the science. And, you know, folks that don't have access to the science like some of us do may not actually come at the right solutions because they don't understand the full science. So I think the only piece is, again, it's like everything has to be a balance. And I think that the folks who are going out and doing this testing or whatever really need to understand the science.
I know we have a few more
Hi.
who would like
My
to
name
ask
is
questions.
Brett Singer. I'm from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. Great presentations and great work you're doing. When we look, I'm in the indoor environment group, when we look at the sort of the most common serious health-related problems in buildings, they're almost always related to operations, maintenance, things like this. So building a great building is really important. Low-emitting materials, like these are sort of easy things to do. We should be doing them. But I'm curious how you're making the connections, either in the work you do or in the standards that you're trying to promote, in building buildings that are easier to maintain and operate so that you don't have those problems. And I'm thinking for things like inadequate ventilation, dampness and mold problems. These are things that commonly happen. These are, we could talk about flame retardants and risk and things like this long term, but these are things that are making people sick on a day-to-day basis. And again, they're almost always in the operation and maintenance realm. And how you build the building relates to that, but I'm wondering what you do to make that connection of building the building is easier to operate correctly.
So good question. O&M is something that is a personal interest, and particularly with my early career years in the military, I think understanding how to keep equipment functioning is as important as building the equipment. So often, Clark is not quite directly engaged in the operations and maintenance of the facilities we build, but we sometimes do package contracts where, as a multi-joint venture, there will be some kind of interaction with the facilities folks so that they understand what kind of equipment we are turning over. So there is an awesome innovation credit in the LEED system. It's the especially for LEED for new construction, and it's called the O&M Starter Toolkit. And I think it starts to incentivize new construction to be thinking about how the building will be operated, and that comes right down to both the cleaning products that are used in buildings as well as what are the protocols for pest control and dealing with irrigation and et cetera, waste management. So I support the idea that, particularly for our folks that are more directly involved in facility operation and development of campus facilities as a whole, I think maybe your points of view as far as implementing O&M.
Yeah, I think that if you think that if you're going to build a green, healthy building, and then as soon as it's done, you're done, you can just, that's it. You're making a big mistake. Education is really key to make sure the people who are going to use that building understand how it works and what's going to be required of them. We went through, when we first opened our building, it was like for 3 years we had monthly lunch and learns just to talk about how it's working, get people's feedback about how it's going. That was really key to getting everybody on board. And as new people come on, it's also really important to educate them. This is not your typical building. There's certain things that are expected of you and required of you. So that's all really important. We're going through well recertification right now, and that's been a really great process, again, to reawaken and are thinking about what it's like to be healthy in this building and things that we have to do. So these recertifications are important. The last thing is, when we built our building, we had very much involved with Carnegie Mellon University and University of Pittsburgh. And we realized after we built the building that a lot of time people build green buildings and nobody knows if they work. Mm-hmm. So we decided to open our building up to them to use as a lab, and we let them put sensors all throughout the building. And every day, thousands of data points are being sent to both universities. They've been able to study the building, do research on the building, and give us feedback on how to make the building operate even better. So that's been a really positive thing, too.
And this also goes towards Whitney's comment about ongoing monitoring. And the beauty of cell phone is that talking about serving the 100%. Most of the world has access to that. So I think we're in a good direction. Next question.
Thank you for your presentation. My name is Li Yang. It's very important that innovation will helping the health. But I think we also use the least cost. We have to have cost benefit. I think instead of building another new building, but if we put a lot of people to street and the hygiene is not good and there's no way to sleep, that is not a good solution. And you can see a lot of building is new, but they vacate a house from the homeowners when they really have nothing in default. So we have to pay attention and the better solution rather than keep reaching the new terminology without a benefit to the general public of society. And if you think the people, they were sent to the jail, but you build a jail so noisy, and people cannot even sleep, and they cannot even have food, and I don't think that's a good solution either. And it's a lot of rehab, and they put an elder to the rehab. Actually, they are splitting the family and take their resources away. That's not a good solution either. So we must put a solution for the best interest of the general public rather than try to build a new building or take away the resources from government. The government have the constraint. They have to reduce the debt rather than keep it spending and issue the bond to benefit the developers. So I hope you pay attention to all these important issues, make the best solutions, because the people's health depends on good technique and good clean and least cost, but with better health. Thank you.
So healthy communities, one final word before we close.
Healthy communities. Well, I know that some of our campus partners, including Harvard, have been deeply invested in thinking about, and also one of our currently active jobs out in California, the University of California, San Diego, they are building one of the most massive multi-million square foot campuses for this living and learning laboratory environment. And so I think that healthy communities, both at the academic level, that are environments that are able to introduce young people into how higher quality of life can be had through sustainable buildings and the amenities that they connect them. It's something that we're really interested in. I mean, we've talked a lot about also in our dinner around the construction process and how to ameliorate impacts on communities during the construction process. But I know that our partners have a lot of interesting ideas here too around how the community scale of health can be implemented and activated.
Thank you for those who asked questions. Thank you for reminding us that it's really people that we are building for. Right. So let's have a big applause for our panelists today.